Brooklyn Independent Television.
Welcome to Brooklyn Elected Officials. My name is Joy Simmons, today's host. I am the judicial delegate for the 40th Assembly District in Brooklyn. I'm also the Chief of Staff for Councilman Charles Barron, and I would like to welcome our guests today. So we have Brother Omowale Clay. He's a longtime human rights activist, a member of the December 12th movement, and a member of the Freedom Party leadership team. We have Assemblywoman Inez Barron. She's the assembly person for the 40th Assembly District in Brooklyn, covering East New York. She's been in the education system for over 37 years, a principal for 18 of those years. A teacher for 18 of those years, and as well as a principal and assistant superintendent. Fearless fighter in Albany, and an author of key legislation that was passed in the Assembly regarding Starlight City that kept Starlight City affordable for 30 years. Yes, all right, wonderful. And we have Councilman Charles Barron. He's been a community and human rights and black empowerment activist for many years. He's been a part of the Black Panther Party, the Black United Front, studying with Reverend Herbert Daughtry at the House of the Lord Church. He is the Dynamics of Leadership co-founder and CEO of that corporation, and has done leadership trainings all over the country. And a city council person in the 42nd council district in East New York, covering some of Brownsville, Canarsie, East Flatbush, and is the #1 council person in affordable housing. That's right. #1 in parks, fixed up 3 new parks in East New York, and also brought in new schools, 2 $80 million schools. That's right. So that's fabulous. So we're here today, and we're going to talk about 2 very key issues. One, the living wage bill. We want to talk about Walmart and some other local issues that are very important to our community, the Brooklyn community, and our people in general. So Councilman Barron, can you start us off with talking about the living wage bill that's recently being discussed on the city council level?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, the biggest challenge in our communities and the biggest challenge in America under a capitalist system that's based upon greed is poverty. Poverty. Martin Luther King was fighting hard against poverty. I think he was killed not because of his outspokenness on the Vietnam War, but because of his attack on capitalism. In 1968, Martin Luther King was going to Washington this time. Unlike 63, for a couple of hours to make some speeches, he was going to Washington in 68 to stay there and set up Resurrection City. As a matter of fact, Inez actually went in 68 to Resurrection City. Of course, he was assassinated in 68, didn't get a chance to go, but they did start Resurrection City on May 13th, 1968, and it lasted to June 24th. The weather came, the police came. Unlike Zuccotti Park, where they let them stay, they took them out in Resurrection City because it was black and brown people predominantly. But he was fighting for a wage, a living wage for all those who were impoverished or living in poverty. He was fighting for an anti-poverty program that was $30 billion. The year before, John Conyers, who just got into Congress in 1967, had a $30 billion anti-poverty program. So King was saying, let's stay there. We're not leaving until there's a radical. This is deep. This is Dr. King. See, Jesse Jackson Sharpton and the civil rights activists, they're more black capitalists, whereas Dr. King was a democratic socialist. He was saying that not only that we need to have civil rights, but we need to have a radical rearrangement of the political and economic order. That's revolution. And that was coming from Dr. King. So now in the city council, we're saying, well, they're not fighting for all of that, which we should be fighting for. Some of us are, but at least a living wage. Right now, there's a minimum wage, $7.25 an hour. That's about $16,000, $18,000 a year. No one can live off that. But yet, these companies, like related, multi-billion-dollar companies, get tax breaks, hundreds of millions of dollars floating bonds, and don't have to pay sales tax sometime if they're like, that's how the Waltons got rich with Walmart. They didn't have to pay the sales tax. They put it in their pockets and they let them do that. So we're saying if you're going to get millions of free taxpayer money from the city, you have to pay a living wage, at least $10.50 an hour, plus health care. If you're going to do health care, it's $11.50 an hour. Now, even that is only $21,000 a year. You really can't even live off that. The living wage of $10.50 should actually be the minimum wage, and we should be talking about something greater. But in the city council, the speaker has a way of manipulating people, and she's manipulating, in my opinion, people like Inez Dickens and people like Leroy Comrie, to get them to go against the living wage bill so she could have some cover, because she has not come out on it yet, because she's running for mayor. So she has an allegiance to the wealthy, to the business community. So she get the ones that she controls to say they're against it. And they say they're against it because it's going to hurt small businesses.
And there was an op-ed piece.
She did an op-ed piece. Inez Dickens
right?
did an op-ed piece in the Daily News. This is why I'm mentioning her, because she went out public, and so did Leroy Comrie. But how do you say that when you know what business in Harlem, they already amended the bill. It used to be, if you had a company that has a revenue of $1 million, plus getting $100,000 from the city, you have to pay a living wage. But since people complain that would hurt small businesses, the bill is amended to you have to have $5 million in revenue and getting $1 million in subsidies and free money from the city before the living wage kicks in. How many of our businesses are worth $5 million and getting $1 million from the city? So that's bogus when her and Leroy come and say it's going to hurt the black businesses. No, because there ain't too many black businesses get that. So that's where the living wage bill stands right now. And they're going to try to amend it more. And before you know it, you can get $1 trillion, and then and only then will you have to pay a living wage. So we got to fight for that living wage, and we got to tell those who are fighting against a living wage that these are the people that should not represent us, because they're working for the rich and they're not working for the working class families of this city.
It's refreshing to hear a political leader, particularly in the area of elected politics, to say what many of our folks are thinking. You know, one of the tragedies of electoral politics in this country is you have your representative write an article in the paper or be interviewed or come on television, and they start talking and their mouths are moving, but we don't know who's behind what they're saying, because we know it doesn't represent our interest. And so I think it's very important to hear what Councilman Barron is saying from the perspective of leadership and the importance of making sure that people are clear. I mean, some issues are not simple issues. Some people's issues are complex, but that's not really the central issue. The central issue is, do our people need to know? Our people are willing to face any hardship, but you got to tell them the truth. And once they know the truth, then they know what they have to do to try to access those things that make their life better. And so for our people, the question of a living wage, they know that their earnings that they're making is not allowing them to live. There was a recent article that said half of the people in this country are in poverty. And they throw these articles out in these big newspapers, the Wall Street Journal, New York Times and stuff, and you almost become numb from them telling you, hey, stupid, we're going to take it all. And it's almost a certain kind of, it's like with the video games, the kids start playing games where they're killing people all the time. So then you put them in a uniform and then you send them somewhere and they actually start killing people, and they're desensitized to it. So I think it's very important that our political leadership, and I'm very proud of Councilman Barron and Assemblywoman Barron, because they represent not just East New York, but what they represent is a style of politic and a content of politic that really just talks about the truth. The living wage, they could pay a living wage. They lay people off. They just laid off some of the education workers, 700 of them. We should never forget that. These people were at the low end of the rung in terms of earnings. I mean, some of these guys, they throw away more money than, in fact, many of these families could have had just to survive for a year, a whole year, and they throw money like that away. So there is a fundamental violation of our human rights when we're debating the question of a living wage. And as the councilman said, we're talking about raising it to somebody who makes $21,000 a year. Who in this country could do that? But one of the schemes that they have, if you notice, is that you can't. So it means that these families are pooling all of their money just to survive. You can't afford to live anywhere else. There's no affordable housing. So whatever little money, meager money you make, it's part of the total income of the family to just try to survive. I was recently on a trip to Northern Africa, to Algiers for an international conference, and I was talking to a doctor from Egypt, and he was saying to me, one of the things about healthcare is, and that businesses don't like about healthcare, is that if you have a national healthcare policy, it means the workers are not tied to that job based on getting health benefits. And I said, that's a very interesting point you're making. He says, yes, having health benefits is a means of control. And it's a means of you accepting harsh conditions because you know you can't afford to not have health care. If you're a family, if you're a young family, you have 2 or 3 kids, how can you not have health care? If they get sick, you have to see a doctor. You have to do those things. So they opposed any kind of system of national health care, and this was his view, and I was sharing, my agreement with it, that even with the meager means of health care that they get is all that they have. And so they're in a condition where they're accepting injustices, they're accepting prejudice and racism, they're accepting meager wages and stuff, and the things that make them make decisions around whether they should go out on strike, whether they should fight, whether they should do this, is how much they're attached to fundamental things that they need for their family's survival. So, it's really back in the, I think it was in the 60s, they introduced the Racketeering Influenced Organization Law. It was called RICO. And it was really done to target criminal enterprises, enterprises that appear to operate legally on the surface, but in fact control actual illegal operations that are going on. And of course it was targeted against organized crime. But when you look at what's going on in terms of the Federal Deposit Insurance Agency, when you look at what's happening at the World Bank, when you look what's happening at these investment firms, they're actually criminal enterprises. And they're really committing crimes against humanity. And that's the thing we really have to push our people to understand. It's not going to get better based on their altruism or based on them giving us something to distract us. It's only going to get better is when we really just tighten our heads and our minds and we, as we tell our children, we don't do what I say, do what I do. And we take them on because we're the people. And the people are the soul. And I want to make sure our listeners understand this. The people are the sole, complete, unequivocal source of wealth. The problem is we don't control it, we don't own it, we don't dispense it, and we don't determine the plans for how it will grow and the kinds of industries and the kinds of benefits and the kinds of fundamental human rights that people need. We don't do that. And as long as that's the situation that we're laboring under, then we discuss absurd situations like the living wage, which when it first started, everybody was on board. And then Bloomberg got his hatchet woman, Christine Quinn, to start sowing dissent among folks. And then you had people dropping off and then talking about the most absurd issue in the world is that these private companies are the job creators. They always try to do different things and not call them criminals. The source of employment is the job creators in private industry, but they're not creating jobs, And I'll just say this as closing. There's a reporter who came on TV and he was mad. It was a little segment he did, and he says, some of these politicians talk about we don't need to have the government create jobs. We really don't need to have the government create. We have to have the private sector create jobs. And he says, well, damn it, that's where your job is. That's your job. You're telling them don't get anybody else jobs, but your job is a government job. And you're saying, but let's put everything in the private sector because they want to hand over the wealth of this country over and over again to the rich.
Yeah. There's so many of our people living, it's about 20 to 40% of this nation that's living below the poverty level. So I said, well, we keep hearing that and it's thrown out there. So I said, let me go check out the figures. And the poverty level, the federal poverty threshold for an individual is $11,000, less than $1,000 a month, less than $1,000 a month. And if you look at an individual, a woman, let's say, with 3 children, you would think, well, okay, it's got to be double. No. With that 3 children, she's only going to be entitled to $22,000, even though it's now 4 people that we're talking about, 4 times as many individuals in a household. That poverty level is only at $22,000. So we talk about people who are living below the poverty level. We're talking about people who are, putting together 2 pennies and trying to make a livelihood, trying to provide a household for their children. And we need to even look at that minimum level that we're talking about, not even talking about 7.25 cents an hour or even moving it to 10. A real living wage would be 11, 12, at least $13 an hour. And talking about after taxes and talking about then having those benefits that we're talking about so that people have that freedom to move about and to say, okay, well, this is another area that I want to move into and not feel that they're hemmed into a particular position or job so that they need the benefits for their families. But those levels that are set by the Census Bureau need to be re-examined, need to be looked at so that we can make it realistic for the times that we're living in.
Right. With apartment rents and food, everything going up. I mean, how can you live?
Made $80,000 a year, you're not really middle class. What is middle class in America? As rich as this nation is, you can make $100,000 a year before taxes. They'll take a third of that out, so you're down to 60 some odd thousand. If your child is going to college, that's 20, 30,000. Per year or a semester. And if you got to deal with health care, because you're making $100,000 so you can't get Medicaid or nothing. This is not like Cuba, where health care is free, or like Venezuela, where health care is free, or Zimbabwe, some of these nations they talk about where health care and education is free, not in America. In America, education is a big business. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. It's a money-making business. So when we talk about a living wage, I mean, this is peanuts compared to what really needs to happen, a more equitable redistribution of wealth and income. What are we doing in a nation, the richest nation in the world, and you have indigenous people on reservations that you stole this land for? You have African people in low-income neighborhoods that you stole from Africa, made us, forced us to build the wealth here, and won't give us our reparations, and so we have major issues like reparations. And how could we have all of these political prisoners, people in prison fighting for freedom and fighting for a decent wage for our people? So this living wage issue and the issues that we talk about, wealth and equitable distribution of income, are very serious.
And that actually is related to the Walmart struggle.
Yes.
And can you tell us about the Walmart struggle that's happening in East New York and citywide?
Right. Walmart's trying to come into New York City because they're losing money. Walmart, by the Waltons, there's 4 or 5 Waltons making over $20 billion a year, or worth $20 billion. They're some of the wealthiest people in the world. Sam Walton got rich in this retail business because he got welfare from the government. He got breaks for workers. He got breaks for taxes, sales tax. In some places where Walmart got dirt cheap land to build their huge stores, he didn't have to pay tax for the land, and he didn't even have to pay the sales tax. They told him that he can keep the sales tax for that particular state, put it in his pocket. That's how he got rich. He wasn't a genius. He wasn't smart. He got over because he was a white man that got some connections. So now you build these little roving plantations that you put all over the place, 484,000 square feet they need to build one, and you pay the workers minimum wage, $7.53 to $8.53 an hour. You make sure you hire them part-time so you don't have to pay pension and you don't have to pay health care. As a matter of fact, when they hire them, they tell them, here's a Medicaid form. file for Medicaid. This is what the Walmart employer tells. They even had a policy called Dead Peasants, where they took out life insurance on their workers, and Walmart was the beneficiary. And Capitalism, a Love Story that Michael Moore put together showed the poor lady was crying. She couldn't pay for her husband's funeral, and Walmart collected $2 million insurance on her husband because they took out a policy on him. And when you bring in Walmart into a community, for every 2 slave wage jobs that you get, you lose 3, because other places close down. They come in, and our people, y'all got to stop it. You got to stop saying, I need the low prices. It's going to create jobs. No, you lose jobs. And after the low prices come in, when they eliminate the competition, the prices go back up. And research has been done that their prices is not as low as people think. So in East New York, we have a project. We negotiated with Related Company and said, we want to build this. Some community space. We're going to have 2,300 units of housing, retail on the bottom. It's going to create 8,700 jobs, 7,000 temporary construction jobs, and 1,700 permanent jobs without Walmart. And when we were at the table with Related, they sat at the table as we're sitting, and I said, we don't want Walmart in here. They said, fine, Charles. So we signed off on it. They agreed no Walmart, that we bring in smaller companies, and we even told them that we're going to make sure some of our local businesses get space in here so that everybody's not coming in and taking our jobs and taking our space. That's the plan.
And so in the Related, just to be clear for the audience, Related are the developers.
The developers. The Related is the developers. That's who I negotiate with, Related, the developers. And they were going to bring in, they even mentioned ShopRite, who was willing to pay $12 an hour, allow for the workers to unionize, whereas Walmart pays $7.53 an hour, and you cannot unionize, and you can only work part-time. But other entities are bringing in pension and health care and doing some positive things. So now Walmart's trying to sell themselves on the city. And what they did, if they were so good, we had a city council hearing. We said, cameras all over the place. Every camera in the world was there. Come on in. Tell us why you're so good for New York City. They said, no, it's not fair. Why are you picking on us? And then they buy off some of our leaders. They're giving our leaders money right now as we speak. They're giving them money for programs. They're giving them money in their pockets. And they're going to come and say, we need jobs. I said, well, why don't you listen to this? We got jobs. But we need low price goods. We're going to get that with a living wage, with respect. We need jobs with dignity.
Inez Barron, you were there. Can you talk about some of the points that you made when you testified? Because you did give a very good presentation.
Thank you. Walmart has a history that is not complementary to those of us who look at the humanistic picture. They've been the subject of many lawsuits, wage discrimination, gender discrimination, racism, and they have not overcome that history. So we don't expect them to throw off what they've done in the past and now present themselves as some model of concern about our people. So we're looking at that history, and to talk about benefits that they're getting. The councilman talked about the benefits that they got initially. They've saturated the suburban market, and now they're coming into the urban market. And we've got to be very clear that they cannot benefit by purchasing this land. Related cannot get the benefit of this land at a less than fair market price. And that's an issue that we've called to the state to make sure that they pay an equitable price for this land. In addition to talking about what's going to come, at the outset, we've got to make sure that they pay, that Related pays a fair price for this land, and that we don't give it away, especially in these economic times where we're looking at a deficit and we have a governor who has not made any commitment at all to honoring the legislative mandate, the judicial mandate, I should say, that CFE be honored. There's still $3.8 billion that's due for the CFE negotiations that were successful.
Tell them what CFE is.
CFE is a campaign for fiscal equity, and it's a lawsuit that was waged for 13 years. And at the outset, the conclusion was that the courts said, no, New York City has been underfunded by the state for these many years, and that the state must make New York City whole by giving them $5.5 billion. And a portion of that was given for the first 2 years after the courts made their decision. But now it's just disappeared. It's dried up. And this present governor and our past governor, unfortunately, did not adhere to that judicial mandate. So New York City is owed about $3.7 billion, and this governor has not made a commitment to that. So we certainly want to make sure that we get as many revenues in as we're entitled to.
So Omawale, I know you've been working with the Freedom Party and have been taking some actions regarding Walmart. Could you just tell us a little bit about that? We only have a few minutes left. So
this past Wednesday, we were down at Related and had a demonstration. And as we went down about a month and a half ago, the people who were passing by were very supportive. In fact, they were even more supportive now that the idea of the 99% and the 1%, and they view Related and those kind of companies and Walmart as that 1%. I think it's important to make note that the Manhattan Borough President Scott Stringer just came out with a report that indicated that Walmart would devastate the Harlem community, as we stated it would the East New York community, as it would any metropolitan or urban area community because of its basic practices. But he did an extensive study. People can go on the internet and get it. He projected that if Walmart moved into Harlem, they would lose from 30 to 41 businesses, not jobs, 30 to 41 businesses, particularly in the areas of fresh fruits, produce, supermarkets, and such. Just the colossalness of their business. I want our audience to think about something, that $1 billion is $1,000 million. Now, people know about John, people who are as old as some of us on this platform, the Assemblywoman excused, and Joyce, you speaks for itself. Remember the John Bears Patifton and the Millionaire, because $1 million seemed like a lot. Well, it's still a lot in people's minds, $1 million. And Charles alluded to something about the economic structure of this country. But $1 billion is $1,000 million. So when he says Walton, and there are 5 of them, each of them have $20 billion. When you talk about Mayor Bloomberg has $20 billion, that means they have 20,000 $1 million.
Wow, when you put it in that perspective, it helps to
20,000
think about
$1 million in terms of that. And he's opposing the living wage in terms of that. Just in closing, Charles raised the point. Where is the middle class in this country? Well, I think any intelligent person who looked at just a strict economic structural analysis country would see that the middle class in this country starts probably at about the low end of it is about $500,000 a year. That's the low end of it, $500,000 a year. Because when you talk about super wealth at the top, and then you have this, it's almost like a bell curve, very tight at the top and gets wider as you go down. But the middle class, they try to sell us that term to make you think that you're something you're not. And one of the problems is we have many people in our community who have middle class ideas and working class pocketbooks. And so they operate as if they're the middle class and don't even have an idea what that is, except sometimes they try to pretend they're not doing as badly as they are. Well, the rug is being pulled from underneath those ideas, and we're looking at a real period of hardship and requires some real analysis.
Okay, I'd like to thank my guests and thank you for watching Brooklyn Elected Officials on the BCAT TV network.
Watch this and other Brooklyn Independent Television episodes online at breakartsmedia.org/BIT.